When I first saw this meme, it was 2 years ago. And at the time, while it did fit with the culture, it wasn't that accurate as it is now. And I'm afraid that as time goes by, this meme becomes more and more self-evident. And it's quite scary if you think about it. So the first one says that, of course, you're allowed to ask questions. Here is the list of approved questions. Now, I remember seeing a viral clip on Twitter. I believe it was from an Australian talk show in which they were talking about the conflict of Ukraine. And obviously, everyone there was pro-Ukraine, but there was one guy in the audience, a young lad, who claims that he's Russian, and he asked the question, like, why is NATO going near the borders of Russia? And instead of the host answering that question, he kicked the guy out from the studio. He says, we feel uncomfortable having you here, please leave. And everyone clapped. Now, this is just one example. A more recent one had to do with a reporter asking a German politician if, because of the Russia-Ukraine situation, Germany is going to restart its nuclear power plant. And the German politician says, this is a legit question. I will not refuse to answer it based on ideological reasons. And I'm like, hold on a little bit. So you are saying that there are questions that you would refuse to answer based on ideological reasons. I mean, in that statement, it's so obvious that there are certain questions that are off bounds. And then I have seen many times, usually also on television, people challenging the government mandates during the pandemic. And just by asking a question, you see how either the politician refuses to respond or they fly into a rage. So yeah, it's very concerning, isn't it? And when you look at how the US president, for example, he gets a list of pre-approved reporters that are the ones that are going to ask him questions. Like, everything is so fake and so contrived that you look on the internet, every single website closes its comment sections. Like, there's very little feedback that's coming from the audience. Most of the internet is turning back into television. YouTube removing the dislike button is giving the same energy vibes. That basically, like, what it means is that there is no conversation, but it is a facade of conversation. Like, if you're going to have only pre-approved questions that you're allowed to ask, it's almost like theater. It's almost like a reality show where there's a script and everyone follows it and we pretend that we have a debate, but the decision is already taken before the debate even happens. And it's very sad. It reminds me of how the Young Turks also had, I believe, an interaction with the audience, and they asked people to write down the questions, and they only selected the questions that they liked. And this goes against everything I learned at university. You see, at university, we would have a debate, let's say, on the death penalty. And they would ask people to have a position and to write an essay on why they support that particular position. Like, why is the reason that you're against the death penalty? Write an essay. And you'd come with it. You would read it in front of the class. People would ask you questions. You would have to support what you've written. And then the next day they would say, now we want everyone to support the opposite position. So write an essay on how you would support being for the death penalty if you were against previously. And it wasn't an easy job to do. It was quite difficult, but at least you now understood the whole situation. Like, you looked at it from the opposite side, and it encouraged you to learn how to debate, how to have a point. Again, I went to law school, and obviously sometimes you're a lawyer and you need to defend a guy who actually did it. Like, your client might actually be guilty, but you need to make sure he doesn't get sentenced more than he deserves. So it was training people on how to be good debaters, and not only that, but it was training people to have strong arguments that cannot be tackled by just asking questions. But we get to see that now this isn't the case. I mean, I saw Nancy Pelosi recently talking about using more taxpayer money for some COVID-related stuff, and when the reporter asked her, it's like, well, why are you doing this in a time of crisis? She's like, well, this is science, this is going forward. In other words, like, no more questions, right? So this is definitely something that's becoming more and more prevalent. And as we move to the second one, we notice that this has been going on for a long while. And this is actually something that really tears society apart and makes people unable to trust each other. So you're absolutely free to study and investigate for yourself. Here is the list of the approved sources. And how many times did you guys not talk with someone that you disagree, and you show them like a news article, and the person automatically dismisses the news article just because of the publication that the news article is in? So for example, you would talk with the progressive blue checkmark on Twitter, and you would show them a Fox News article, and they would be like, oh, well, this is from Fox News. Do you have any real sources? Right? So they don't even engage with the article anymore. They don't even read it. They don't even think for themselves. They don't even try to see what's going on there. Like, it's almost like if 2 + 2 = 4 is written in Fox News, it becomes automatically false. And by the way, this is happening with the right as well. Like, you can show a right-winger sometimes. It depends on the person, but I have seen it happen. Like, you can show them an article from The Guardian or the BBC, and they automatically dismiss it just because it comes from The Guardian or the BBC, without reading it, without looking at what it's trying to say. And this gets people to just isolate themselves in a bubble. But what's worse is that this is happening at universities as well. Like, there was a case, I believe, 2 years ago, where a student was complaining that the professor failed him because he cited Jordan Peterson in his thesis. Now, Jordan Peterson is a world-renowned clinical psychologist with peer-reviewed published papers, but you're not allowed to cite him. And not only that, there have been people who told me that they had to do some gender study material at the university or some other, and they were told that they're only allowed to cite from feminist papers, which completely ruins the purpose of the academia. I mean, the reason we trusted the academia to begin with is that it was the marketplace of free ideas, and only the good ideas would be the ones that would bubble to the surface and then slip into society. But then you had like the progressives who claim that the marketplace of ideas isn't working, that you have more often than not bad ideas coming out. So you now need to create a safe space. You need to make it more inclusive, blah, blah, blah. But here's how they pull this sleight of hand. What we consider to be good ideas is not the same what the progressives consider to be good ideas. You see, the progressives are utopians. Like, the progressives believes in equality and equity. So any idea that comes out that doesn't believe in equality or equity means that it's inherently a bad idea. Now, what normal people understand by a good idea is this: an idea that can stand up to questions. So if someone comes up with an idea and people try to debunk it by asking it questions and they can't, then it's a good idea. And that is the idea that has to be promoted. In fact, that's how academia was supposed to work. People come up with a concept, like, for example, they can say, free market economics is a good thing. And they go in front of the class and people start asking them questions. And if they can defend their thesis, if they can argue their position and no one can debunk them, then it's a good idea. Doesn't that make sense? Isn't that logical, right? But like, the problem is, well, when you go and you say free market economics is a good concept, well, that goes against equity. That goes against inclusion. So it must be a bad idea according to the progressives, because they have a different agenda. They have a different plan. So in order to prevent this from happening, well, you now need to limit the area of study that people can investigate for themselves. You limit the questions that people are allowed to ask. And then, of course, when you do that, people are going to arrive to the approved conclusions. And yeah, like there are also approved conclusions that you can arrive at. Like, even if you follow step 1 and 2, you still need to arrive to the correct conclusion. Like, for example, the conclusion is that America is a systemically racist country, that blah, blah, blah. Right? You need to arrive to the concept that it's a cisgender, heteronormative, patriarchal society that advantages white people and blah, blah, blah. Like, you still need to come to the correct conclusions, even though you follow step 1 and 2. So it is very sad. Now, a lot of progressives will say, well, yeah, but like, this doesn't happen with the government. Like, this happens with the corporations and the academia, which is independent from the government, completely detached and disconnected. It's got nothing to... Yeah, okay, fine, whatever. It still doesn't make you any more free, you know? Honestly, like, these people in the medieval time, they would say, well, you know, the king isn't burning witches, it's the church. Like, the church is just people freely associating through religion. Is their right to do religion? Like, of course they can persecute witches. Well, what's wrong with witch hunts? You know, like, honestly, it's kind of the same argument. From my point of view, the individual, like the average citizen, is being treated like a child. You notice that you're being forced to think in a certain way. And it's being done by powerful institutions that have more power than a single person can have. And it cracks down on the liberty of the person. But what can you do? You know, it's just an observation, and unfortunately, I think this meme is going to become even more powerful as the years go by. Let me know what you guys think, though, and I'll see you in the comment section. Take care.